For Grandma Margaret, I have just gotten home from the longest of long 12 hours that somehow turned into 16 hours because of staffing issues and nursing shifts. I am exhausted mentally and physically, and I feel filthy with sweat, tears, and many other things I should not be covered in. All I want to do right now is chop something into oblivion until I feel somewhat normal again. I want to not have to think for just a little while. When I unlock my apartment door, I am surprised to find Grandma Margaret sitting at the kitchen table, smiling, as always. After a shower and a change of clothes, I realizes that exactly what I need to do is make noefla soup for myself and Grandma. What is noefla soup, you may ask? It is a German dumpling soup that you'll be hard-pressed to find in any diner outside of the Midwest. Those who eat it are picky about how it is made, and no two people make it exactly the same. Not only that, but it is a recipe that is impossible to make exactly the same every time that you make it. Grandma Mary taught me how to make it as a small girl, long before junior high and shortly after I learned to read. It has always been our favorite meal to share. Starting with the vegetables, I carefully peels the potatoes, making sure that I cut off the skin and only a small amount of potato. No conversation passes between the two of us. Grandma always knows when I needed a mental break at the end of the day and how most times I can't talk about what went so horribly wrong due to patient privacy. She never pushes me to talk about it. Instead, she sits at the table and watches as I goes through the motions of preparing our dish. A pound or so of potatoes later, I'm never too careful about the amounts that go into making noefla soup, or the recipe. Noefla soup is not a dish of measurement, it is a dish of feelings. The amounts that go into it depend on what you're hungry for at the moment, what looks right, or what feels right. No recipe has ever been put on paper, just passed on from one generation to the next with wise words of, "Whenever it looks like enough, dear." Grandma always said that it was not a recipe meant to be shrunk or modified. It always makes a large amount, and any attempt at shrinking has been unsuccessful, although making it larger comes out perfectly every time. This works well when you are from the Midwest and are a firm believer in freezing the extra for a day when you don't want to make it from scratch. I chop the celery, carrots, and onions quickly as Margaret looks on from the table, nodding her approval occasionally. Once all of the vegetables are cooking in a lot of butter, yes, it's bad for you, but most comfort foods are, it's time to make the noefla dough. My favorite part of making this meal, and also the most comforting. Eggs, flour, and a tiny bit of chicken broth get mixed together until everything is mixed together. The secret is to use only a certain amount of flour and add more chicken broth until it is right. Doing the reverse, adding set amounts of all three ingredients and adding more flour tends to make the dough taste just like you would think it would. Flour. Some people prefer chicken noodle soup, others like macaroni and cheese after long days. For me it is noefla soup. Creating the dough is one of the most relaxing things I could think to do after a long day, and Grandma watches carefully as I knead the dough and rolls it into snakes. Only every once in a while does she gestures to add just a little more chicken broth. Dropping bits of dough into boiling chicken broth puts me into a trance. As I place the lid on the pot to boil for several minutes, my mind slips into the past. The bad melts away quickly, and memories of standing on a stool wearing Grandma's second-best apron make their way to the front of my mind. I remember the hem of the apron dragging on the floor at first, being so little I could barely see over the counter. Then I remember the awkward middle school years and unloading my boy and friend troubles over a bowl of noefla dough. Lastly, I remember becoming an adult and trying hard to make time in my busy life for Grandma's house at least once a week. Though, once work, friends, significant others, and my own children came into the picture. It seems that almost 2 would go by before I found myself back in her kitchen again. As I put the finishing touches on the soup and turn off the burner, the memories fade and I am back in my own apartment once again. Grandma says nothing, but she has always made my day better, just by being there. I dish a single bowl of soup, butter a piece of bread, because nothing goes with Noefla soup the way a buttered piece of bread does, and sit down at the table. Grandma Mary has been gone for 11 years now, and on the hardest days, after the worst shifts, I always miss her the most. The regrets become an inner monologue, before being spoken out loud. Did I spend enough time with her?
Midnight in California. My grandmother was a woman who was stuck in her yacht club youth and insisted that everyone who did not want a life similar to her own was either lying or delusional. She was an inspiring woman, true in tenacity and grit, and I aspired to be as self-assured as she. When I was 18, I decided to study abroad in the art of communication, and I could not be more ecstatic to leave the predictable life I led in California. Every morning I would commute on Highway 101. Listen to Fiona Apple, and imagine the fury Greta Thunberg would embody after taking a glance at all the litter dancing in between the exhaust fumes of the middle class and the electric cars of the upper class. My car was one with exhaust fumes dating back from a model far too old to be a reliable ride. However, we made do. The wealth of my grandmother did not pass down to me, yet much to my mother's dismay she often gave a helping hand, making my appearance confusing to outsiders. Beat-up car. Fancy education, shitty apartment, front row at the opera on Friday night. I did all right in school, I turned in my assignments on time, but I was not extraordinary like my brother. He ended up valedictorian by luck. He was the aggravating type of smart that gave the least amount of effort and received the greatest reward. I was dependable, but that was never enough for me. I wished I was a bit more spontaneous, but truth be told, I feared I did not have the guts. I lived in my books and in my head, and played life rather safe than sorry. Moving to Switzerland was my grandmother's idea, and the thought instantly brought upon an overwhelming confusion of fear and excitement. I confided my feelings in her, to which she explained that the onslaught of emotions I held was the perfect concoction to form an agreeable decision. With my faith in her words and my fate in her hands, I decided to take the punch. I had nothing to lose, and yet I was afraid of everything. The night before I left, I looked at the clock sitting upon my now empty shelves. 11 p.m., California time. The sun was already rising in Switzerland. They were going on without me, they were getting up and heading to work, life was happening. I whispered into my pillow as I rested my head, begging them to wait for me as I closed my eyes. The day of my departure was a Friday. My superstitious mind was grateful that the date was not the 13th, but it may as well have been, as I was overcome with a sense of dread. I told myself the dread was not a sign of bad luck, but rather an apprehension for the unknown. I was not so sure I believed myself. My thoughts echoed like a cacophonous chorus echoing every negative instinct. I felt like Lindsey Sterling's violin, so I listened to Claude Debussy to calm me down. Goodbyes were never something I had much patience for. I was a bad actress whose transparency of expression revealed her secret sentiments. I couldn't help but feel as though I was giving an inadequate performance as I waved goodbye to my family and the life I once knew. I remember hearing a podcast once about all the preparation actors must go through before getting into character. In order to enter a role authentically, they would read scripts and analyze not only the character they were to portray, but also who they were close to, their setting, the time period, their outfit choices, and the arc they would inevitably take. I wished I had the script in front of me to know how I should feel. My grandmother kissed my forehead with her Dior lipstick and hugged me with a trace of Chanel No. 5. She didn't say anything then, just winked, and I knew that she understood. I boarded the plane at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was edging on dinner time in Switzerland, but I had not eaten anything all day. The light was shining outside, bright as ever. I always said the only predictable thing I liked about California was the weather. I suddenly felt a wave of appreciation for the place I called home, feeling grateful now for the life it had given me. It added to who I was as a character. Now, I could see that. I realized that when I would meet new people and explain my birthplace, I would do so with a sense of pride. I breathed in the last breath of California air through the little crack between the carousel leading up to the plane, and where the aircraft was stationed. I had a window seat, inconvenient for bathroom breaks, but perfect for daydreaming, which I was to do plenty of on the 9-hour flight. We touched down in Geneva at 7 o'clock in the morning, local time. I watched the sunrise over the vineyards winding around the lake, a Monet-like scene with soft colors palatable to the eye. As the nose of the plane hit the ground, I felt like I was nosediving into a dream. Confused by the French language and Swiss efficiency, I slowly managed to navigate my way out of the airport, and into my new apartment. The time zone was confusing me and I was exhausted despite